Well, hello there, friends, and welcome back to the JOANN Stitch Along with our friends at yarnspirations.com. My name is Marley Bird, and I will be your instructor for this 6-week event making the Chevron and Entrelac knit blanket. You can follow along with these videos simply by downloading the free pattern. I've put a link in the video description box right down there below, and that will take you to each section of the pattern, and you can work along with that section's videos as they are released. You can follow along with me in the videos, or if you're a competent knitter and you want to tackle it on your own, you can binge stitch this blanket in no time. Totally up to you, and either way is okay. All right, for this video, you should have completed your week 1 instructions as we are moving on to week 2, where we will learn a loop stitch and a bobble stitch. If you're ready, I'm ready. Grab your homework. Let's jump in. I have my homework complete and I've already downloaded the week 2 instructions, and I can see that in these instructions we are going to maintain the chevron stitch pattern, but it's obvious there's some texture happening here and I'm real excited about that. I love that the designer gives us all of the stitch multiples throughout this process, including some notes regarding the stitch markers between the decreases. We've already have those in place, so we're just going to maintain those as we go. As I continue on reading through the pattern, I can see that rows 1 through 6 are essentially a repeat of the stockinette portion we did in last week's video. So what you will notice here is I have already jumped ahead and I've completed rows 1 through 6 of week 2, and I'm ready to begin my 7th row. So by this point, your blanket is obviously larger than my little sample here, but this is what yours should look like. Get through the first 6 rows and you will be ready for row 7. After you finish those rows, I highly recommend adding a lifeline to your blanket at this point. That way, if you choose to not do the following loops or bobbles, you have a place to rip back to and you can just carry on with the chevron stitch for this section. To get help with adding a lifeline, I've put a link in the video description box below for a video showing you just how to do it. Row 7 is where we introduce the loop stitch to our blanket. Don't worry if you've never done it before. I'll walk you through the steps that I use to accomplish this really cute and textural stitch. It's a lot of fun to make. The hardest part, I think, is maintaining the chevron stitch pattern as we're doing these loops, but if we take it slow and steady, we are going to be just fine. Let's go ahead and jump into row 7. Row 7 is a right side row, and we begin just like we have in all of the other right side rows with an SSK. So I begin with my SSK. Now the instructions say I'm supposed to do make a loop here and then a knit one, and I need to do that a total of 4 times. So I will be working with 2 stitches and I will do that a total of 4 times. So to do a make loop, are you ready? Let's pay attention. We're going to go into the stitch, but we are not going to knit it or anything else. We're just going to put our needle into that stitch. Take your working yarn and bring it sort of between the needles and to the front. Can you see that? Like I'm between the needles and to the front. Now I can wrap this yarn around my thumb. I can make the loop just kind of the distance I want it to. You do what works best for you. I like to wrap around my thumb and bring the yarn back between my needles back to the back. Okay, can you see where I am right now? So my needle is still through that stitch, but I want you to see what I'm going to do. I'm going to go into this stitch again, and I'm going over top of the loop I just brought back, and I'm going to go into the stitch again, and I'm going to knit it. So I yarn over my needle just like I normally would, and then bring that out. Okay, now I can let that jump off. What I've done here is I've created a loop and I've created 2 stitches. Now on the next row, we will do a knit 2 together to get rid of one of those stitches. So we'll get back down to 1 stitch. I will do a little note here that in other patterns that I have worked this particular stitch, at this point in time, you would have this stitch jump up and over that stitch to make it so that you're back to only 1 stitch. But we're not doing that in this pattern because the designer wrote the decrease on the next row. Okay, so that is a loop made. And now we have to knit one. So the next stitch over, we will do a knit one. So that is one set of what are in the parentheses. So we have to do that a total of 4 times. Are you ready? So we're going to do another loop. We go into the stitch, come between the needles to the front, wrap your thumb between the needles back to the back. We pull this up, come over sort of on top of that yarn you brought back to the back, go into the stitch and knit it. And then knit one. This is going to take a little bit of time. It's not as fast as some of the other stitches we've done, but it adds so much texture and fun to the pattern. So we go into the stitch, bring our yarn between the needles to the front, wrap your thumb, bring between the needles back to the back, and then we're going to go back into that same stitch and knit it, and then knit one. Go into the stitch, bring my yarn between the needles to the front, wrap my thumb between the needles back to the back, go back into that same stitch on my left hand needle and knit it, and then knit one. So we should have 4 loops, 1, 2, 3, 4. So that is our 4 repeat. Now we have to do a make a loop and a make one, and then make a loop and a make one. So this is going to be our increase. So instead of doing a knit front and back and a knit front and back like we did before, we're going to make a loop and then work a make one, and then make a loop and then work a make one. So we're going to learn a new increase here by working these make ones. So let's make our loop first. We go into the stitch, bring our yarn between the needles to the front, wrap our thumb between the needles to the back, and then go into that stitch and knit it and jump off. Now, you see that string right there? We are going to use our left hand needle to scoop up that bar and create a new stitch. So take your left hand needle and going from front to back, I want you to scoop up that bar. Just scoop it up just like so. Once you do that, I want you to knit it through the back leg. Okay, so it's going to be the hardest one to get into. Just go into the back leg of that bar and knit it. You just created a stitch. Okay, so now we have to do all that again. We have to do a loop, so let's make our loop. We go into the next stitch, bring our yarn between the needles. Notice I'm going between the needles to the front, wrap it around my thumb, between the needles back to the back. Take my right hand needle, go into that stitch again and knit it. Gets a little tricky here. And now I'm going to do a make one. So I find that bar that is attached to the stitch that just jumped off and the stitch that's remaining on my left hand needle. I'm going to take my left hand needle, I'm going to scoop up that bar from front to back, and then I'm going to knit into that scoop I just picked up, that bar. I'm going to knit into it through the back leg. Take your time with this. Don't try and go super fast or anything. Just take your time and you will get this just fine. So I just worked my increase. Okay, you with me? Woo! All right. So now I'm going to do my loop and my knit one, my loop and my knit one, my loop and my knit one, my loop and my knit one. That will leave me to my last 2 stitches before my marker. And that's where I normally would do my knit 2 together, but we're going to do an L knit 2 together. So I'll show you how to get that when we get down there. So let's go ahead and do our loops and knit ones all the way down to that spot. Go into the stitch, between the needles to the front, around your thumb, between the needles back to the back, knit into that stitch again, or go into that stitch again because you really didn't knit it the first time, and knit it, and then knit one, into the stitch, and knit it. Now ideally we're trying to make all of these loops the same size, so if you're wrapping it around your thumb, hopefully it's all coming out pretty consistent like. Make sure you do your knit one after you make your loop. Go in, between the needles to the front, wrap, between the needles back to the back, knit it, and off, and then knit one. Into the stitch, between the needles to the front, wrap your thumb, between the needles to the back, go into that stitch again, and knit it. Oops, I split my yarn. And then knit one. So getting a little bit easier now as you're on this part. Okay, so we have all of those loops. Now we have to work an L knit two together. You might be thinking to yourself, what is an L knit two together? Well, it's a knit two together and you create a loop at the same time. So we're going to go into both of these stitches just like we're knitting them together. Bring our yarn between the needles to the front, yarn over our thumb, between the needles back to the back, and then we're going to go back into that knit two together and knit it. This is so tricky, you guys. And knit them together. Ah! And off. Woo! All right. And then slip our marker. Oh boy. How crazy is that? Isn't that awesome? So we have all of these really fun loops happening here. And the good news is we get to do it all again. You have to do this full repeat all the way down your blanket. So you have 9 total repeats. So you have to do this 8 more times. For my little swatch, I only have to do it once. Remember, we start off with our SSK. So there's no loop on that one. Thank goodness. But now we jump into our loop and then our knit one. So here we go. We go into the stitch, between our needles to the front, over my thumb, between the needles back to the back, and then knit that stitch. And then knit one. Gets a little bit faster as you get going. Into the stitch, between the needles to the front, around my thumb, between the needles to the back, and then knit that stitch. And then knit one. Between the needles to the front, over my thumb, between the needles to the back, knit that stitch, and then knit one. Let's see, that's 3. Nope. Yep, 1, 2, 3, so I have one more. So into the stitch, between the needles to the front, around my thumb, between the needles to the back, knit into that stitch, and then knit one. So that is my repeat of 4. Okay. Now I'm going to do my make a loop and then make one. So I go into the stitch, between the needles to the front, around my thumb, between the needles to the back, knit into that stitch, and then we're going to do a make one. So you see that bar. We're going to pick up that bar going from front to back with our left hand needle, and then go into the back leg and knit it. All right, so that was 1. We have to do that again. So we go into that stitch, between the needles to the front, around our thumb, between the needles to the back, knit into that stitch, and now we have to do a make one. Use your left hand needle to scoop up that bar, knit that bar through the back leg. Boom! And we just did that. Okay? I will tell you guys, it's a little tricky at the beginning to get these going, but as you get going down the row and start working them a little bit more and more, it becomes easier. Okay, so now we're back to our make a loop and knit one. We have to do that a total of 4 times. So I'm going to make my loop. Let's get that stitch knit here. Oops. And then knit one. Okay, so there's one. Two. Three. And four. All right, so now we're going to end with our L knit two together. So we go into both of these stitches as if we're going to knit two together. Bring our yarn between the two needles to the front, over my thumb, back to the back. This one's the trickiest one, I think, because then we have to go back through both of those to knit them together. This one is really tricky, so take your time with this one. There we go, and off. Boom! I did it. Now, here's the kicker. I just finished with an L knit two together, but I really needed to finish with a knit two together. So I did the L knit two together, let's just say so that you could see it done again, but I'm going to take that one off and I am going to finish with a knit two together because at the end of this row, we're supposed to finish with just a plain knit two together. So I'm going to finish with just a plain knit two together. All right? Okay, so you can see here, let's set this down. You can see we have all of these loops, and like I mentioned, with each of these loops comes an extra stitch. So before you had 198 stitches on here, and now once you get all of these loops done, you have 296. That's a lot. Don't worry, we're not going to keep those on there. On this next row, we're going to decrease stitches so that we get back down to our original stitch count. So we're still maintaining our chevron pattern, but now we got to work those decreases to get rid of that extra stitch. So it's really not a whole lot of anything new happening here as we turn our work and we begin the 8th row. Okay, so right here I would start off with knit two. So I knit one and I knit two, and then this is my repeat. I'm going to knit two together. So I knit two stitches together and then knit one. Knit two stitches together. Whew. And then knit one. So I will do this all the way down the row. And these knit two togethers that we're doing are closing up that loop. So it will make it so it's secure and safe and loopy and full of texture and so much fun. When you get to the end of the row, one thing you will notice is that you're back to 22 stitches between your markers again. So when you turn your work, it should look a little something like this. You have these nice loops all kind of poking out here. They're all nice and secure and a lot of fun to create. Now, as we take a look at row 9, you will notice it is another row of loops. Just like before, we begin with our SSK. So right here, I'm on row 9, just so that we're all on the same place. I will start with my SSK. And whereas before I did my loop and then my knit one, I'm going to do my knit one and then my loop. So I will knit one stitch. And now I will create my loop. So I go in, between my needles to the front, wrap my thumb, between my needles to the back, and knit. Okay. Now, if I wanted to, what I was trying to say before is instead of having to do that knit two together row, one thing I could do is I could grab this stitch here and have it jump up and over that loop, and then that loop is done. And so then on the following row, I would simply be knitting, not having to worry about my knit two togethers. Let me show you what I mean again. So I would knit one stitch, make my loop, so I go in front, my loop back to the back, knit one, and this is where we stopped before, and this is where on row 8 we did a knit two together and it closed that. But if I wanted to, I could do a pass of the slip stitch over, or not the slip stitch, but the one that, you know, we kind of have there, and it's already completed. You see what I mean? So I'm in, create my loop, man, I really made that one snug. All right, here we go. Knit, and then pass the stitch over, and then that's done. See how I don't have any of the double loops happening here? Okay, so you want to make sure that we are going through this the proper number of times. So we need to have 4 loops. So we only have 3 on this row, so I have to do one more knit one and one more make loop. And just to be consistent, I'm going to have that jump up and over. Okay, so those are my 4, and now I have to do a make one and a make a loop. So this would be my make one. There's my bar. Can you see my bar there? Okay, I'm going to take my left hand needle, scoop up my bar. I'm going to knit my bar through the back leg. Sometimes I'll take my needle and I'll swivel it around so I can get through the back leg and knit. And now I'm going to do make my loop. And again, to be consistent, I'm going to have that jump up and over so you guys can see what they look like here. Okay, so that was one. I need to do that twice, remember? So I have to pick up my bar again. There's a bar, it's right there. I'm going to go into the back leg of that bar and knit it. Now I have to do making of my loop. This one's really snug here, so it's going to be a little bit tricky. All right, so that's off. Let's get that stitch. It's a snug one, so this passing of the stitch will be a little bit tricky, but I can do it. There we are. All right, so that was the peak. That was my top because I did my 2 make ones. Now I'm going to do my knit one and my loop all the way down to my marker down here. All right, so you will do the same thing all the way down this row, but let's take a look. This is the end of my row 9. You can see I have this nice loopy fringe kind of stuff happening here. It looks really awesome. I have the same stitch count that I started with because I had my double stitches. Remember, I had that first stitch jump up and over the second, sort of like a bind off. So when I turn my work and go to row 10, where the instructions say to knit one and then knit 2 together all the way down the row, I only have to knit one. If you did not just do the loops like I did, if you did them the way we did it the first time, you would be knitting one and then knitting 2 together. But you can see here, by doing it the way that I showed you on the second loop row, it makes this row a lot easier to work down. And I find it just as good looking. I don't have to worry about if I am trapping any of the loops as I am knitting the knit two togethers or the knit one. I just find it a lot easier. So anyways, like I said, you have two options here. Both of them get you some really good looking loops, and the only difference is that treatment of the double stitch resulting with the loop. And then on this row 10, if you have the double stitches, you have to get rid of them. So you would do a knit two together every other stitch. But if you had that one stitch jump the other, you don't have to get rid of anything. So you simply just knit this row. All right, pretty cool. Love it. We're going to take a look at this one more time. So that is the end of row 10. Turn my work, and you can see it looks really nice. Okay, we're not done with the loops. We have to do one more set of loops. So we are going to repeat rows 7 and 8, and then we repeat rows 1 through 6 to get that stockinette section of the chevron. Then we go into some bobble stitches. So rather than making you wait for me to go through all of that, I want to jump to how to do the bobble stitches so you can see how those worked up. So let me go ahead and set this aside. I am going to bring in the little swatch that we were playing around with after video 1. I mean, it's not much there, right? But we are going to jump in to the bobble stitches so that way you can see how these work up. Okay, so the bobble stitches begin on the 21st row. So on row 21, can you guys all see this? Everything looking pretty all right? Move everything out of the way. On row 21, this is what we would do. We start off once again with the SSK, so we slip as if to knit, slip as if to knit, and work that SSK. Now we will knit one and then make a bobble. So for our bobble, we will go ahead. We will knit into the stitch. Don't let it jump off. Knit into the back of the stitch. Don't let it jump off. And then knit back into the front of the stitch. So you have 3 stitches, all right? Now you let that jump off and you turn your work, much like when we did the entrelac. Now you're going to purl 3. So purl 1, 2, 3. Turn your work. Now we knit 3. 1, 2, 3. Turn your work. Purl 3. 1, 2, 3. Turn your work. We're going to knit 1. Knit 2 together, and then pass this stitch up and over that knit 2 together. That leaves 1 stitch on my right hand needle. You can see the bobble is created, and we would carry on with a knit 2. So we knit 1 and knit 2. See that bobble? So the bobble is created from 1 little stitch that we increase to 3, work a couple rows, and then decrease back down to 1. And that gives us this nice little textural 3-dimensional stitch. Now, just like when we did the entrelac base triangles and we did the knit backwards, we could use that same technique when making a bobble, so we don't have to turn our work back and forth. Let me show you. All right, we have to make a bobble again into this stitch here. So I go into the stitch, yarn over, come out the stitch, go into the back leg of the stitch, yarn over, come out the stitch, go back into the front leg, yarn over, come out the stitch, and off. So I have these 3 stitches. This is where I would turn my work and purl these 3. So instead of turning, we're going to knit backwards and purl these 3. Just like when we worked the entrelac. So there's our purl 3. So now we would turn our work, we would knit 3, So knit 1, 2, 3. Then we would turn our work and purl 3. So I will knit backwards, purl 1, or knit backwards 1, knit backwards 2, knit backwards 3. Okay. So now we're back to the front, and this is where we're going to cinch these together. So we knit 1, knit 2 together, pass that stitch over. We have our bobble when we finish, and we continue on with our knit 2. Can you see that? So they both look the same because that's the nature of knitting backwards, but we didn't have to turn our work. You want to see that again? I know those of you who are like, I'm not knitting backwards on the Entrelac ones are looking at these bobbles thinking, all right, maybe I can do this. Let me show you one more time. This is where we would create our bobble stitch. So we would do a knit 1 into the front leg, knit 1 into the back leg, knit 1 again into the front leg, and then off. Now this is where I would turn and purl 3. So I'm just going to purl 3. So 1, 2. I didn't come out of that one. Let's try that again. My yarn is getting split there. There we go. There's 2. There's 3. Turn my work. This is where I would knit 3. So knit 1. Knit 2, knit 3. This is where I would turn my work and purl 3, so I'm going to knit backwards. 1, 2, and 3. This is where I would turn my work and finish it all by a knit 1, knit 2 together, pass that knit over. See that? Okay. So we've done an SSK, we did a knit 1, we did a bobble, we did a knit 2, and we did a bobble. We did a knit 2, we did a bobble. So that now leads us to the peak of our chevron, and we would do a knit front and back twice. Pretty familiar with this after week 1's videos, right? And now we're going to do a bobble, knit 2, bobble, knit 2, bobble, knit 1, and then finish off with our knit 2 together. So here we go. You want to see how to do a bobble again? You will knit into the front leg, knit into the back leg, knit into the front leg, jump off. This is where you would turn your work, but we're not going to turn. We're going to knit backwards. So we go into the back leg. 1, 2, 3. And then we would turn and knit 3. And then we would turn and purl 3. So I'm going to knit backwards. 1, 2, 3. This is where we would turn, bring it all home with the knit 1, knit 2 together, and pass that knit over. See that? So these bobbles, they might seem like they take a lot of time, but they actually don't take any more time than those loop stitches did. All right? And that's what you'll do. Pretty cool, right? Okay, that's literally everything you need to know for this section of the blanket. You know how to make the loops, you know an alternative way to make the loops, you now know how to make the bobble, and you know how to make the bobble with a knitting backwards so you don't have to turn your work all the time. Beyond that, it's simply following the instructions, maintaining the chevron stitch pattern, and we already know how to do that after week 1. So with that, I'm going to let you loose and tell you to continue on with the instructions the way they are written. I cannot wait to see this section complete on your blanket. Make sure you share with us on social media. Use hashtag MarleyBird and hashtag YarnSpirations so we can see your beautiful work and smash your like button. I'm Marley Bird, and I will see you right here for video number 3. Bye. Thanks so much for joining me on the Marley Bird YouTube channel. If you liked what you saw, don't forget to hit subscribe. I've put a link right over there, or you can watch a couple of the videos I've already selected for you right down there. If you want to follow me on social media, I've put my links right over there. You could have all Marley all the time. Bye guys.